Greetings, everybody. It's great to see you again, and thank you for joining us for what is now our 7th of our Town Hall series. A sign of how long this pandemic's been going, since we've been doing these about monthly, that we are already here on number 7. Thank you for coming here, and I hope we continue to deliver unbiased, middle-of-the-road, just the data kinds of information for each of you around this pandemic. As we started last time, we are also focusing on some of our centers of excellence, and we'll be talking both about impact of COVID within the neurological system today, but as well as many other aspects of our Center of Excellence. I'd like to thank the Society for Leading Medicine members, and I'd particularly like to thank our chairs, Huntley and Dan Kubitsa, again, for all the great work they've done. Now, finishing up 2 years, and little did they know they'd be signing up to head that up during COVID, and we really thank them for their great work. I also want to thank the members of the Neurological Institute National Council, who are the hosts and sponsors of this particular town hall today. I particularly want to thank Gary Edwards and Bill Childs, who co-lead that group, and thank them for all of their engagement for Houston Methodist. Now, we're going to try something slightly different today, because we've been getting tons of great questions from y'all throughout all of these, and one of the things we struggle with sometimes is getting to answer as many of the questions as we'd like. We always work to build them into our remarks and then always have some Q&A at the end. But today we actually have Dr. Ashley Drews. You've seen Dr. Drews, who heads up infectious disease really for our system, and has headed up all of our response from an infectious disease perspective to COVID. She is present in the live chat, so we encourage you to ask questions in the live chat, and she will do her best to answer those. I have promised her that if she throws me any of the tough questions my way, I will be giving everybody in the city of Houston her cell phone, so she's going to handle all of the tough questions. We're also very pleased, as always, to have Dr. Dirk Sostman, who heads up our Houston Methodist Academic Institute as our Chief Academic Officer. He'll be updating us a little bit later on therapies and vaccines. We have Dr. Gavin Britz, who will be updating us a little bit later. But first, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Stan Appel. Dr. Appel is the Peggy and Gary Edwards Distinguished Endowed Chair for the Treatment and Research of ALS, has been the chair of neurology here at Houston Methodist since we first had a chair of our own. And for a couple of decades before that was the chair at Baylor College of Medicine, working as the chief of neurology here at Houston Methodist. He is a giant in his field, known internationally as the go-to person for patients with ALS, a wonderful, warm human being, compassionate human being, who told me recently that it is time for him to step down as chair, and so he is transitioning out as chair. We're delighted. Two things. One is that he's staying on. In fact, he is going to head up a research effort we have, and ultimately, hopefully, a clinical effort we have, which is the Ann and Johnny Johnson Center for Cellular Therapeutics. Moving on to critically important new research activities for us. And the beauty of how this transition happens is he will stay on as chair as long as it takes to find somebody to fill those enormous shoes, which is going to be very difficult. So God bless you, Dr. Appel. Thank you for all of your decades-long commitment here, and I'm glad we continue to get you here for a long, long time in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Boone. It's a pleasure and an honor to have served, and please find a replacement quickly.
Dr. Sostman is chairing the committee, so you work with Dr. Sostman.
Good. So I've been asked to talk about the neurologic implications of COVID-19, and just to indicate, I think you're all aware that the primary event that everyone stresses is its effect on the lung. But as you can see from this slide, there are a variety of different organs that are affected. One gets acute respiratory distress syndrome, hyperinflation, cardiac difficulties, kidney, coagulation problems have affected the nervous system in major ways, and neurologic complications. And just to tell you, it turns out that in many of the series, and none of them unfortunately are scientifically validated, maybe a third of what we're seeing in complications from COVID-19 are in fact involving the nervous system. Just to show you a cartoon, there are a couple of important areas that I think I just want to draw to your attention. As the COVID-19 hits the lung, it interacts with an angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE2 receptor, and then there's a protease sitting next to it, TMPRSS2. And the reason these are important to point out is not only are these markers present that are involving COVID-19 in the lung, but they're also present on endothelial cells and a variety of other structures, including aspects of membranes entering the nervous system. So under those circumstances, you see a wide variety of publications that have been brought to the fore, affecting how it's affecting the nervous system. But in general, there are effects on the central nervous system with brain problems, vasculitis, stroke, hypercoagulability. There are also effects on the peripheral nervous system, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and also on the muscle. So the important thing is to realize what are the symptoms that reflect what's going on in the nervous system. Headache, agitation and delirium, impaired consciousness, the sense of smell. Look at the percent. 85% of the cases from 12 hospitals had alterations in the sense of smell and the sense of taste, with the fancy name of dysgeusia, is also in an equivalent number of cases. Here's just a show just to indicate what the brain looks like when in fact you've got an inflammatory response in the nervous system. You can see all these fancy cells to the right there. They're surrounding vessels, but they're also compromising pathways. Now, how does COVID-19 affect the nervous system? Number one, endothelial cells. As I said, the ACE2 receptors allow the virus to enter endothelial cells. That in fact causes not only alterations in the endothelial cells, but leads to problems in coagulation. Viruses are neurotropic. They invade the nervous system. In fact, the olfactory system is affected by virtue of the virus attaching through the ACE2 receptor and with the membrane protease entering. The other question is, to what extent is inflammation, something that we've studied extensively and we will be studying in neurodegenerative diseases in the new Johnson Center that Dr. Boone just described, is a major problem whereby COVID-19 is affecting the nervous system. And I'm going to come back to altered immune system because they're clearly affected here. So just to show you endothelial cells, the ways to get into the nervous system by compromising vasculature, the coagulation. And I want to point out, not only is this leading to more strokes as well as cardiac problems, but in addition, what happens here, that fibrinogen levels are increased, elevated D-dimers, which are fibrin dipeptides, those lead to an activation of macrophages. These are the cells of the innate immune system that can become hyperinflamed and attack various structures. So here's one paper that was just published in large vessel strokes. Here shows you 2 hemorrhagic lesions in patients with COVID-19. I want to stop at this slide because this slide was one that was recently published. It's a series from our medical center here with Jay Volpe, Misra, David Chu, Rajan Gadia, all participating from the Neurological Institute at Methodist to describe a series of cases where in fact it looked like most of the cases in ischemic stroke were embolic, but we don't know for absolute certainty what the percentage of such cases are. There are a series being reported, and it's going to take a while before we know what is the true incidence, that is, new cases of strokes secondary to COVID-19. The fact that it does occur is clear. Now, just to come back, all coronaviruses are neurotropic. That is, they can get to the nervous system and they can go in. And we all know that non-neuronal expression of entry genes go to involve the nose and the olfactory system. Now, just to describe the neurotropism, every one of the major cranial nerves, cranial nerve 1, olfactory, cranial nerve 5, which involves the sensation in the face, the cornea can be affected by coronavirus. The facial nerve, there's where taste is compromised in the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Swallowing, glossopharyngeal, etc. So it's clear that the virus can get to the nervous system by entry. And if you look, there's a viral highway to the brain through all of these cranial nerves. So it's clear there are mechanisms that get us there. Once again, it's through the virus entering the CNS through the ACE2 and the protease in the olfactory mucosa. And then following that, once it gets in, it can get into the vital centers in the medulla in the back of the brain. And this is how things can get compromised. Also, neurotropic viruses alter sleep and our sleep problems. So it's key that we understand that alterations in sleep can be one of the initial manifestations of COVID-19. I just want to go back a number of decades to encephalitis lethargica. This was the consequence of the viruses that affected us in 1916 to 1918. And it was not only an acute viral invasion, but the key thing is going back now 100 years after this epidemic, we note that there was stiffness, bradykinesia, and it gave rise to the syndrome of post-encephalitic Parkinsonism. And the number that was affected, we don't know for absolute certainty, but it was estimated to be more than 1 million worldwide. And the reason I bring this up is we're still not certain whether in fact this was due to the direct virus or more likely it was an immunologic disorder caused by the attack of the immune system against itself with antibodies against a particular receptor that we know can give rise to dramatic alterations with delirium, hallucinations, etc. As a matter of fact, my concern is not only are there acute consequences in terms of stroke and various vasculitides, but there are chronic consequences, and hopefully we can, with vaccines, abort these chronic consequences, because brain fog has been reported by a wide number of patients and hospitals, and brain fog is one of the conditions that can be interpreted as a dementing illness, a hallucinatory illness, a psychiatric illness, but it's clearly a consequence of viral invasion and the immune attack on the nervous system. So there are both acute and chronic consequences, and it's affecting a significant number of those patients who have and are at risk for the coronavirus. I think I'll stop at this point and turn it back over to Dr. Boone.
Thank you, Dr. Appel. Well, I really appreciate that, Dr. Appel, and we'll have time for more questions. And of course, please keep them flowing in. Those that are neurologically oriented that are not in Dr. Drew's territory, we'll make sure that we bring those here for the future. And now it is my pleasure also then to turn to Dr. Gavin Britz. Dr. Britz is the director of the Houston Methodist Neurological Institute, the co-director for the Houston Methodist Center for Neurodegeneration, and he is the Candy and Tom Knudson Centennial Chair in Neurosurgery. Delighted to have you here, Gavin. Thanks
very much. Anyway, so the good news, though, we all need a break from COVID. So I think Dr. Boomstein and me, Gavin, you got a whole hour to talk about neuroprosthetics, and I'm going to get going. So this is a topic that's, as I said to someone else earlier, this is dear to my heart. My dad has got a spinal cord injury. My mom has died from ALS, and this is we started a new program at Methodist called the Center of Neuroprosthetics. So what I'm going to give you guys is a brief overview of what is neuroprosthetics. So first of all, I think recently after Elon Musk's talk, we all saw this article in the New York Times. I shared it with Dirk and Susan, I think Stan Appel, and the whole article was about brain implants that could change the way we live. And this whole talk is about neuroprosthetics and about brain implants. I think that just for a brief background, I've been chair now for 7 years, and we built in a big research platform, and we're going to divide this platform into 3 major centers for neurosurgery. We're going to have the Kenneth Peak Brain Tumor Center under David Baskin's great leadership. We've got the regeneration under Phil's great leadership, and I'm going to start this for at least for a while to get the neuroprosthetics going. So we're going to start off with, and I was a maths guy at school, and people said I should do engineering, and looking back, probably would have been a better choice, although I do love what I do. And when you look at engineering, that's going to solve the world's problems. And as you can see the slide, what's going to change, what's going to cure climate change? Engineering. What's going to cure sustainable energy, improve food sources, waste control, eco-friendly travel, and improve military? It's all the engineers. They are the crux of society, and I think they get undervalued. They're like teachers. They're really undervalued because they're the people that are going to solve all the major problems in the world. So that begs the question, what is neuroprosthetics? And all that neuroprosthetics is utilizing the resources of engineering to solve the biomedical problems in the brain and spinal cord. And I'm going to give you an example. This is a cardiac example. I'm going to play the video. As we know, when people had aortic stenosis before, it required a big thoracotomy.
Right,
well, no, let's first play the heart video. We'll talk about Elon Musk.
Right,
and this is what Elon said about
the Neuralink product demo. I'm really excited to show you what we've got. I think it's going to blow your mind. What's our goal? Our goal is to solve.
So that's what Elon Musk's recent talk, but that's the hard thing. And as you can see,
seamlessly implanted device.
We took away the need to open someone's chest with engineering designs to put a little catheter in the aortic stenosis, blow the balloon up, and place a new valve. If you asked someone 40 years ago that this would be possible, you would be laughing. But now this is engineering problem that solved the whole thing of aortic stenosis and TAVR. So, this is not a new thing. This neuroprosthetics, as we all know, DARPA, which is the research agency for defense, has been very interested in this for a long term, and this is their little video.
DARPA on brain-to-computer interface since the 90s through dozens of programs. And over the past 18 years, it has demonstrated advanced neurotechnologies that rely on surgical implanted electrodes to interface with the central or peripheral nervous systems.
And DARPA has been interested in this now for over 10 years.
These systems take signals from the brain and find patterns which are used to drive prosthetics.
And that's what we're going to do. So this is something that's not new, but it's things. So this gets to the older theme. If you look at the department, we have a center of regeneration. We're going to have a new center of neuroprosthetics. So the underlying theme, working with the cell therapy, is going to be neurorestoration. I think rather than talk about neurorepair, the new term is neurorestoration, which is essentially going to repair, replace, and optimize the brain. And 3 major centers are going to work on this. It's going to be the Regeneration Center, the Prosthetic Center, and then Stan Appel's center he's going to run. And we're all going to work together to help restore the brain. So when you look at neuroengineering, when you think of the strength of combining engineering, I've already showed you what they can do with cell therapy, neuromodulation, exoskeletons, and neuroregeneration, we should be able to restore neural function. We should be able to augment the central nervous system, making people superhuman. And I think, as Elon said the other day as well, we are going to be capable of storing thoughts and having neural thoughts. Someone asks, people as neurosurgeons, I face death all the time, and people say, well, what is death? And all that death is essentially, I'm a religious person, so I think death is, meeting my maker. But for most people as scientists, all the death is depolarizing your brain, your spinal cord. So that what we look at the brain is a pure bag of electricity. So look at technology. People say, well, is this possible? If you look at that slide that I'm demonstrating now with a phone, remember the phone used to be a phone. It's all it was. Now we walk around with a small computer. And if you look at the video, the next phase is going to be this. We have the phone now, and I think within the next few decades, that phone is going to be implanted in our brain. So that's what neuroprosthetics is about. We've evolved the technology, and we're going to move into that arena. So obviously the audience should be asking, well, is this crazy? Are human brain chips just futuristic? Can we really do that? And the answer is no. So this is a case that was done in London, actually early part of last year. This is a gentleman with a complete spinal cord injury, and they planted those chips. If you can see the chips on the skull, the parietal area near the motor cortex, and just by him thinking, he can move the exoskeleton. So this is someone that's completely paralyzed. He's got no connection between his brain and his arms. But in the exoskeleton, he can think his thoughts, and by just thinking his thoughts, he can move the exoskeleton and walk. And this is the stuff that's happening across the world now that we're going to start doing here as well. It's all, as I said, 2 implants, electrodes over the motor cortex, and that's something that's coming to the future. And all this is doing a craniotomy, open the skull, place his electrodes over the motor cortex, record, and then he can think. And I'll show you a video later of how it works as well. This is a great video. This is a gentleman with ALS, and this is I've got courtesy of our collaborators at Caltech and USC. Can you play the video, P? This is a gentleman that had the same thing done, the same procedure, and he's thinking, and he's going to drink his beer by purely thinking, and this robot is working with his thought processes. So you can imagine, I mean, think what I'm saying. This guy's got no movement in his arms or legs, and he is thinking with chips in his brain that he's moving the robot and drinking a beer purely by thought processes. So this sounds like science fiction, but this happened 2 or 3 years ago. And this shows you the strength of the technology, and that's why I'm so excited about this field. And all this is, as I said to you before, the bag of brain is just a bunch of electricity. And all we're going to do is we're going to optimize and utilize the electricity in the brain with different electrodes and allow the motor cortex to be activated, and then you can move the limbs. So this is a really cool video, and we're going to spend at least a minute on this one. And this is a study that just came out of Switzerland now. And obviously there's many different ways to cure paralysis. They used a different approach. They took a monkey model, they put a chip in the motor cortex of the monkey, they then cut the cord on the one side and then isolated all the nerves that can supply the muscles to this area. And play the video for me now. So this is about a 45-second video.
We developed a brain-spinal interface to reestablish the communication between the motor cortex and lumbar spinal circuits in order to restore walking after spinal cord injury in non-human primates. Monkeys received a spinal cord injury interrupting the cortical spinal tract at the thoracic level. This lesion led to a paralysis of the leg ipsilateral to the injury.
And as you can see now, when they're stimulated,
the brain-spinal interface instantly restored coordinated weight-bearing locomotion
so this
of
is
the
something that's
paralyzed
completely
leg as early as 6
bypasses
days
spinal cord injury.
post-injury.
And again, by the monkey thinking, the monkey can move his back leg and they can turn the switch on and off. So he can start walking and he can stop. And that is just done now in design in nature. And that's something that I want Phil to start doing yeah. But that tells you the strength of what we ahead. The next phase, obviously, my thing about memory. And obviously people say, well, how is neuroprosthetics going to affect memory? And let's play Elon's talk.
Another question from Twitter. Will you be able to save and replay memories in the future?
Yes, I think in the future you will be able to save and replay memories. So
listen to what he's saying. You're going to have to have a memory and store the memory and replace it. And we're already working on that in some areas of the country. This is according to Ted Berger from Caltech again, and he's developed a multi-phase electrode where you can map the pathway of the memory system in the brain, and you can try and restore memory. And they just submitted a grant, I know yesterday, on this. Charles Liu from USC with a NeuroPace, same thing, stimulating the hippocampus and restoring memory. And this is the paper that just came out a month ago in Neuron that showed 2 different mechanisms of going out and restoring memory with stimulation of the hippocampus, either with a DBS or a cortical strip. And that's the memory pathways in the brain that we can have different targets, and we're going to specifically work on the entorhinal cortex here at Methodist, but that's what it is. So what's this, the center going to consist of? It's going to consist of a beautiful physical space, which you looked at again yesterday at Houston Methodist. We can have the operating rooms, we can do the patients, we can have the BRC campus from Rice right down the road. We have a primate center at Methodist. We have a large animal hospital at HMA. We've got 7 core engineers from Rice working with us. We're going to hire 3 more engineers for that. We have 7 neurosurgeons. We have our awesome PRMI physicians to work with us. We have central regeneration, obviously with the cell therapy. And our collaborators are going to be Caltech, Texas A&M, and Charles Liu from USC. So, we just started this program. And obviously, we've been thinking about this for a while. And I just hired, can we go back one slide? No, this is, sorry, I'm going back. Okay, sorry. So one of our next hires for the department is Amir, who's going to join us in January. And he's an MD PhD from Pittsburgh. And he's did a functional fellowship, but in addition to that, did a peripheral nerve fellowship. So what he's going to be able to do is to take nerve retransfer, much like those guys Luzon did with the monkeys and doing electrodes. He's going to use the nerves, the peripheral nerve systems, to re-innovate the muscles that have died from the spinal cord injury. And I'm excited for him to start. He's also going to be taking amputees, isolating the nerves, and then mapping which nerves those serve. And then developing a neuroprosthetics that's not going to be just based on robotic movement, but you're going to actually have your own nerves drive this robot. And he's going to join us in us. We've started recently with Lawan at Rice, and we're developing now electrodes and looking at the blood flow, because the problem with a lot of the neuroprosthetics now, it's all to do with epiphenomena. We don't understand what's really happening. And with Lawan, we've got these small little electrodes that we place in the cortex to try and see how the stimulation affects the regional blood flow. And also my lab is looking at hippocampus. I've looked at hippocampus my whole life, and working with Benham from Rice University and myself and Eugene, we're going to help work on different mechanisms to restore memory. We've also, it's not only going to be a therapeutic tool, we're also working on, with again Benham, looking at a new device to objectively diagnose stroke and brain injury in this. So anyway, this is a 15-minute talk on the future program on neuroprosthetics, but as you can see, the potential and the futuristic stuff that's already here. So what we're showing you today is in the world in 2020. So you can imagine what this is going to look like in 15 years' time. It's going to be unbelievable. And Mark, it's going to be unbelievable having Stan run the cell therapy, Dirk support, your support, Susan's support. We can really build a world-class program, and I'm excited, as you can see.
Well, that's great. Well, I don't think I've ever seen you not excited.
No, that's
true. Really, it is exciting stuff. It is very out there. I mean, when you look at some of this stuff, and amazing to think about the restoration of function to people who've had damage to their neurological system. And then, of course, many other complex, interesting discussions. And what better place than a faith-based institution, Houston Methodist Research Institute, an academic institute, to wrestle with those tough questions of how do we do this and do this in a very socially responsible and ethical manner. Way. And it's a great example of collaboration with many partners around the country, and most notably Rice, right next door, who've been such a great partner. And I got to say, I'll bet that was the best tasting beer ever.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, but it's amazing.
It's phenomenal to see that. It really is. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Britz, and Dr. Britz will be available for additional questions as well. But now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Sostman. Dr. Sostman, as everybody knows, is our Chief Academic Officer. He holds the Ernest Cockrell Jr. Presidential Distinguished Chair. Thank you again, Ernie, and the entire Cockrell Foundation for all of your ongoing, many decades-long support of Houston Methodist. Dr. Sostman is going to talk to us now about COVID, some of the treatments, some of the vaccines, and many of the developments that are ongoing. Thank you.
Welcome back, folks. It's delightful to be back with you again. I'm going to give you your monthly COVID-19 updates. As we've talked before, the controlling an infectious disease is all about vaccination. It's about health precautions. And if you get the disease, it's about testing for it and treating it. But really, the best thing to do is to avoid getting an infection in the first place. And considering that we're seeing a surge nationally and here in Texas of increasing cases, I thought I'd like to spend a lot of my time today on how to stay safe and how to try to not become a statistic. So first of all, precautions, masks, it's very simple. Masks work. There are a ton of misconceptions out there about masks, that they don't work, or they're dangerous, or the virus is smaller than the pores in the mask. All false. Masks are essential in close contact situations. They're, in my opinion, essential anywhere you're indoors. And I think they can also be helpful, although outdoors is certainly far less dangerous. They can be helpful in certain outdoor situations as well. Masks work both ways. They prevent an infected person from spewing aerosols and particles containing the virus into the atmosphere, but they also protect a person who is healthy from having those particles and aerosols get into their nose and mouth and infect them. So masks are, early on we didn't really appreciate this, but now we know for sure masks work. They are an essential part of our armamentarium against COVID-19. Eye protection has been kind of a more topical thing. We didn't really talk about it for the longest time, but recently we have become increasingly aware that the eye is a mucous membrane of a sort, and you can get viruses entering the body through the conjunctiva and the eyes. The dose is usually not as large as for getting it in the nose, because there's just not a lot of airflow to the eyes. But certainly if you're sitting on an airplane and even if the middle seat is empty, if you got a person in the other seat who's coughing and sneezing, those ballistic droplets can get in your eyes and infect you. So we now recommend in any kind of higher risk situation, sitting next to somebody in an airplane would be a good example. Being in an elevator with an infected person, being at home with an infected person, we do recommend eye protection. Face shields are one low-cost way to do this. Personally, I was on an airplane last weekend, and personally I wore these goggles that I got for $4 from Home Depot. They have one-way valves to expel air. There's no way, other than that, they're totally solid. There's no way for air to get in around your eyes. They're hugely uncomfortable for an airplane flight, but boy, it's better than being in the ICU. Now, one important thing to mention is that these are not a substitute for masks. These protect your eyes. Masks protect your nose and mouth. Obviously, I'm sure your mom told you to wash your hands all the time. I hope you were more compliant than I was when I was a kid, but I've become a believer. My mom and your mom were totally right about this. Soap and detergents dissolve fat. And fat is, the common term for what we call in science lipids. And the coronavirus is enveloped by a layer of lipid membrane, and a detergent gets in there, it disrupts that lipid membrane, and it really inactivates the virus. If you felt like washing your hands with soap and water or detergent and water 20 times a day, I don't think that would be too often. And since your hands are the final common pathway for touching your mouth, touching your nose, touching your eyes, of getting the virus into your body from contaminated surfaces, in my opinion, it's much more efficient and effective to wash your hands a lot and or use hand sanitizer that's at least 60 or 70% alcohol based. It's probably the most effective thing to do rather than trying to disinfect your entire environment. Every piece of mail you get, everything you get from the grocery store, everything you touch, that is a really hard task to accomplish with 100% accuracy. But if you wash your hands all the time, that is a lot easier to do, and it's very effective. So winter is coming, and in fact, in a lot of parts of the country, winter is already here. And what does that mean? Well, as we've talked before, respiratory viruses prosper in the winter for a lot of different reasons. Immunity is hampered by dry air. Viruses survive better in dry air. People are closer together indoors. Ventilation is less good. And in the graph on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the vertical axis is kind of the number of infections per size of population. And what you can see is a lot of the places that are really suffering right now are the ones where it's really cold already. North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Utah, and so forth. We in Texas are getting a tremendous number of cases, but per 100,000 population, it's not as bad as some of these other places where winter has already arrived. So what are some of the things you can do? Well, one thing is if you are unable to get a lot of fresh air in your house or your business, be sure that the filters in your air conditioning system are of high quality, and that is at least MERV 13. Those will trap a lot of the dust and liquid particles that carry viruses. The other thing you can consider doing, particularly, let's say, if you've got someone at home who is ill, is get a portable air cleaner that uses HEPA filtration. HEPA filters are really equivalent to N95 filtration that we use in the hospital. These are not cheap, but if you're concerned for whatever reason about your interior environment, they're a very sensible measure to consider using. As we've pointed out before, a higher relative humidity and warmer temperatures indoor really reduce the survival time of the virus. This is a website that the Department of Homeland Security maintains that you can do with the little sliders, and you can figure out how long the virus is projected to survive. But compared to kind of 68 degrees and 20 or 30% relative humidity, if you maintain your house in the 72 to 74 range with 50 or 60% relative humidity, you cut the survival time of the virus in the atmosphere by close to 50%. So, key thing to do. Summarize winter tips. Follow all those normal precautions with extra diligence. Wash your hands, wear masks frequently, particularly in high-risk situations. Consider using eye protections. Either ventilate your indoor air or treat it with humidification and filtration. Consider wearing a face mask even indoors to keep your nose warm and moist. That really helps you protect yourself against the virus. Work with your physician to measure your vitamin D levels. Take supplements if the levels are low. Sleep really boosts your immune function. Get extra sleep. Don't be out there trying to find a bar that's open. Sleep, stay at home, and of course, get your flu shot. So a few updates on treatments. There are several treatments now that have been proven to be effective, either with randomized controlled trials, which is we've mentioned are the gold standard for medical evidence, or with a large number of cohort trials that all point in the same direction. So remdesivir, certainly the antiviral drug, is effective. Convalescent plasma, we believe, is effective, and the FDA agrees. There are some immune modulators like dexamethasone and baricitinib that have been shown effective in severely ill patients. These are not things that people should be taking if they test positive and are asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic, they have a normal oxygen saturation. But in the critically ill, these can be life-saving. In terms of probably effective, I think the data that I've seen is so far pretty scanty, but if it's borne out, by peer-reviewed review of this data, the monoclonal antibodies are going to be a game changer because they can be used in outpatients to prevent hospitalization. They can be used in inpatients to reduce the severity and duration of the illness. And I think these are going to be a bridge to the availability of an effective vaccine. Now, as I said, they're not in the proven effective category yet because really all we've seen is press release data. We haven't seen the full scientific reviews yet. And then tocilizumab is an immune modulator that is effective in some populations but not others. I'm proud to say that Houston Methodist has been at the forefront of all of the really critical, game-changing clinical trials in COVID-19, ranging from remdesivir to convalescent plasma to now the monoclonal antibody trials. You've probably seen in the news media that one of the Lilly monoclonal antibody trials was paused at their request for quote-unquote a safety issue. I don't know exactly what this is. There's no details available publicly. I suspect it has to do with some FDA findings in one of their manufacturing plants that kind of came out in the same day in the news media. But I do not believe this is going to derail the monoclonal antibody story, and it's the one that I probably have the greatest confidence in. Just again to show you what Houston Methodist is doing, this is just our current listing of trials, and we cover everything from mildly symptomatic outpatients to people who are on the heart-lung machine. We've recruited a total of about 1,200 patients for clinical trials since the COVID epidemic started, and I think the infrastructure we've built and the close cooperation between research and the hospital has really been a critical enabler for us to bring these trials and treatments to the community. Vaccines, I'm going to go over relatively quickly. There's not a lot of important new news on this. The AstraZeneca vaccine is still paused in the USA. The trials have been resumed everywhere else in the world. The independent review judged that this one patient event was not due to the vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine was paused a couple of days ago, again for a patient issue, and that's under investigation. I'm really not that worried about it. You know, these kinds of things are going to happen. In the first place, between all these companies, you're talking about 100,000 people in these trials, and in any group of 100,000 people, severe illnesses are going to occur. Secondly, even if the vaccines are in some way involved, the prevalence of these reactions appears to be extraordinarily low, and the risk-benefit would still be in favor of vaccination. There are a couple of other vaccines that are starting to hit the news, particularly the Novavax. And I would point out that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are still, as far as we know, clicking along and making excellent progress towards submitting their data to the FDA. Obviously, once a vaccine or two vaccines are approved for emergency use by the FDA, that's not the end of the story. Many people now, because of all the political stuff, are more reluctant than they may otherwise have been to get vaccinated. Personally, I will be happy to be videoed taking the vaccine if the FDA approves it. I have renewed confidence in them. The logistical challenges of vaccinating, a couple 100 million people, particularly with 2-dose vaccines, are not to be sneezed at. But I'm pretty sure that American ingenuity will be able to solve this challenge. What are some of the potential outcomes? Well, the bad things would be scenario 3 or 4, where the vaccines are just not that effective, or we find some severe side effects. If those things happen, that means make sure your supply of masks and hand sanitizer is very full, because we're going to be dealing with this for a lot longer than we thought we were. But I really believe that the good outcomes are far, far, far more likely. Either a vaccine that is really super effective, and the guy who's in charge of Operation Warp Speed is talking about 80 to 90% now, and I have to believe that he knows a lot more about it than you or I know. So we could get vaccination of the high-risk groups, maybe beginning late this year or early next year. We could potentially get everybody who needs to be vaccinated by next summer. Even with a somewhat less effective vaccine, as long as the side effects are minor, I think we could be really making huge progress by next spring. We're probably going to want to consider very strongly having hand washing and use of masks part of our normal lives, at least during the flu season, maybe forever, even with an effective COVID vaccine. So that's kind of a quick tour through the winter and some of the medical things that are on the horizon or already here. But remember, you yourself are probably your best defense against getting COVID-19. Or if you get it, having washed your hands, wearing a mask, you're probably going to get a much lower dose of virus, and your odds of getting severely ill are therefore reduced. So it's really up to you what your future holds with this continued pandemic. And we are here to help with advice. If you should get ill, we are obviously here to help you with medical treatment, and also for keeping the hospital and clinical environment totally safe, so that we can be here to help you with any other medical conditions that you may have. So thank you for listening, and it's, as always, an honor to give you these remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dirk. As always, enjoyed your remarks, and I always derive some hope when I listen to Dirk speak as well. And I think there's, as he talked about, some good reason for some hope, and we'll go into some more details about that going forward. But in the meantime, I want to pick up on the theme he talked about in terms of we're all our own best defense, because I think we're at one of those points societally here in Houston where it is time for us to all be together extra careful, so that we don't end up with another challenging situation. So this is our curve. Y'all have seen this many a time. And of course, the massive curve that happened this summer, which was such a stress and strain. A first curve that happened in April that was, as I've shown you data before, not dramatically different than the at least height of the curve we would see during a normal flu season. It was much more rapid in its onset because of the infectiousness of this virus. So if you follow with me then to the most recent days here on the curve, what you're going to see is now the beginning of a concerning trend for us. We had come down very, very nicely, and as we talked last month, we were in a rough, steady state, and we'd be up a few, down a few, up a few, down a few. Our very lowest 7 p.m. total of patients in hospital at Houston Methodist was 137. You can see now, we've had a stretch here in the 180s So that's a pretty significant uptick. Now, if I were to look at the sort of 7-day average of that nadir, it was probably more like 150. So we're somewhere in a 20+% increase already at this point. Very manageable level, not stressing or straining our systems at this point. But I'm looking at that curve, and if you follow to the left and you look at that curve kind of towards the end of May, it sure looks an awful lot similar right now. What we've also seen at Houston Methodist, and we're seeing similar data across the Texas Medical Center, is now an uptick in the testing. That goes hand in hand, of course, but this is now both inpatients and outpatients. So our nadir was a 7-day running average of 32 patients a day being tested. Now, to put that in perspective, our peak was a 7-day running average of just under 400 or it was actually on July 4th was our peak 7-day rolling average. Our peak individual day right about then was 550 plus patients. We're now back up to about 56 on a 7-day average. So that's a pretty significant increase from 32, not in core numbers, but when you think percentage. And again, you see on the orange, the percent positivity, you're seeing that same trend. So it's not just more people, but more people we're testing as a percentage are positive, which is a great sort of indicator of disease prevalence in the community. So again, starting to look like that. In fact, you can roll back all the way to late August was the last time we saw a positivity rate that's now about 7% from a low of about 4.5, or a 7-day running average of 56 from a low of 32. So now's the time we need to all do the right things, because we're doing a lot of things societally that are going to increase the spread of the virus. We've talked about the risk-benefit analyses and everything else with that. Those make sense to do, but we can't let our behaviors outside of that, whether it's restaurants, bars, gatherings, other places where we let our guards down, to then again have a significant outbreak. And of course, with the weather changing and everything else, as you saw with Dirk's commentary about drier air, less humid air, cooler air, we begin to see more risk for spread. What this ultimately reflects is the R, or the spreading factor. How many people does each individual give this virus to? This is the School of Public Health from UT and their site. You can see for a very sustained period of time, we've been under 1. In fact, we were quite a bit under 1 as you looked at September. And now for about 2-3 weeks, creeping up. And over the last few days, now back over 1, meaning this is clearly spreading. It reflects the other data we've seen. So again, a cautionary note that now is a time where we all need to be extra careful. It doesn't mean you can't leave your house, and I'm not saying any of those things, but we need to be really, really careful, from wearing a mask, wearing face shields where appropriate. We'll talk about some more of that, and washing our hands. So we're going to jump right into some of the questions you've been asking, and these will be the ones that kind of are right up my alley, and then we'll come and the group of us will answer some of those. So the first question we've touched on, but I want to go into a little further detail, which is how long do we anticipate everybody needing to continue with mitigation activities for COVID-19? What's the probability for another pandemic in the near to midterm future? I'm not 100% sure if you're asking more COVID pandemic or a different pandemic, so I'll try to answer both of those. A corollary is, when will life be back to normal, or will it ever be? Is it always going to be different? And for some people who are really high risk, when is it safe to come out again? So Dirk touched a lot on this, and what I've been telling people, I actually saw some patients in my office yesterday, we all had this discussion. I'm fairly optimistic that we can have a somewhat normal second half of 2021. Somewhat normal. It won't be fully normal. The reason and rationale for that is the two major things Dirk talked about. I agree with him completely that we have a potential significantly game-changing advance if we can get safe monoclonal antibodies and get those to people who are high risk early on when they're diagnosed with the disease, to keep them from getting sicker, to keep them from getting getting into the hospital. Perhaps to even use prophylactically in some high-risk groups. All of that remains to be seen. We don't have all the study results, but that would clearly change the calculus a lot if we knew that all the young people could run out and, we think it's okay they get sick, with the caveat being we don't understand some of the chronic sequelae that Dr. Appel was talking about. So I still personally wouldn't want to get it, and I wouldn't want my kids to get it, because I worry about what does this mean for them a few years down the road, which we don't fully understand. But certainly for people who are at less risk of mortality, we would have a little looser ability, because the people we needed to protect, we'd have ways of either protecting or preventing decline. So I'm hopeful that that becomes a bridge to some of the vaccination. And we're very hopeful that the vaccinations are happening in that first half of 2021. to put it in perspective, we vaccinate a little less than half of the adult population with a single dose flu shot sometime between, call it September and March, but the bulk of it is sort of September to December. There's a tail to that. So we have the normal, everyday infrastructure to do this and do this effectively if the supply of the vaccine is there and the supply chain is effective. And that's going to be hospital systems. It may be doctors' offices. It's definitely going to be pharmacies to do that. But here's the complexities. It's now 2 doses, not 1 dose, and the dose has to match. So if you get Moderna, you need to get Moderna the second time, or Pfizer, you have to get Pfizer the second time. So a lot more logistics, obviously double the implementation, but it's probably way more than double the logistics with all the tracking and getting people in and all those kinds of things. And these vaccines are hard to distribute because of temperature issues. So won't be easy, but I still think it's reasonable to believe that with Operation Warp Speed and production of a lot of vaccine, that if the supply's there, we can get this to the bulk of the population. We've been, who want it and who need it, we've been very active working with the state, working with the county, working with the city on initial protocols. It's still a black box because we don't know the details, but clearly high-risk groups will be prioritized. How well we will stratify within those high-risk groups is still to be determined, but I'm hopeful, and of course we want to get it to the highest risk people first. Now, getting to the question, and I'll come back to this question about another pandemic, will life be totally back to normal? I'm with Dirk. I think that latter half of 2021 is not going to be fully normal. Will we get back to schools in a much normalized way? I hope so, and I think so. Will we get back to athletic events in a more normalized way? Hopefully, probably. Again, if vaccines fizzle out, it's a totally different story. But will we be totally back to normal? We're still going to face COVID issues probably for much longer than that. Keep in mind that supply chain, that vaccination that I'm talking about is going to be very effective in the U.S. and in other developed countries in Europe and the Far East and other places. But in much of the world, it's going to be a much higher challenge to get vaccine to the world. So this will still be going around the world. We'll still have impacts on travel. We'll still have the issue of globalization and all of those questions. So it'll be a while. And if you travel to Asia, you see it's become the norm to wear a mask when one is sick. There are some people who wear them more than that. But it's almost common courtesy that if you have an upper respiratory symptoms, whether allergies or something else, people wear a mask to protect others. I think we're going to start shifting some of our cultural norms as well. In terms of another pandemic, we know that we're going to see something here. My gut is we're not going to see this rip-roar out of control like we saw in July, but that's a gut instinct, and it's because of masks and precautions. But I'll be surprised, to be honest, if we don't see those Methodist numbers double or even triple from where they are now over the next few months, and perhaps even be sustained through the fall and winter in that way. Again, I wish I had a better crystal ball, but I do think we're going to be facing a little bit of a challenging next few months for all of us. In terms of another pandemic, I think it's inevitable. We've seen that. There will be other pandemics. We need to be much better prepared and much more ready to do that in the future. So we got asked a couple of questions about, now that things are improving, and of course I'm showing you data now to say, well, we're starting to turn the corner the other direction. But what advice should people continue to follow? So there were examples here of someone kind of in a younger to earlier middle-aged kind of age group. Is it relatively safe to eat outdoors in a restaurant? How about at a friend's house? And if not, when would you consider it to be safe? Look, I've been pretty conservative out there. I've said constantly bars are inconsistent with a pandemic. We should be figuring out how to support our bars. We should not be utilizing bars. We should not be putting people in those situations. I personally worry we've gone a little too far on the restaurant side. I still haven't eaten at one. I would feel perfectly comfortable in an outdoor environment. I would still be cautious. I would enter and exit. I'd go use restrooms or wherever I'm walking around with a mask on. Out of courtesy, when my server comes to serve me, who's getting exposed to many people, I'd put my mask on as we interact, but I'd have it off to eat and enjoy my time with family and friends if that's what I want to do. If you're meeting with friends, which many people, of course, are, we have as well, we do it outside and we stay distance. We're very careful, and we're with other people we know are also being careful, and so that's something for you to also be considering. And of course, at the base of all of that, you have to evaluate your own personal risk. If you have a multitude of medical issues, if you're much older, you have to be much more careful than if you're not. Similar question about being in a restaurant. This one seems very detailed, so I wonder if somebody had a specific issue. because this was, what if you eat in a restaurant in close proximity to somebody who, a couple days ago had COVID and now has no symptoms, they're not quarantining, go out and eat, that's a bad idea. You don't want to be near people during an infectious phase whatsoever in a restaurant by definition, because you're eating and you have to take off your mask to eat or drink. So I would avoid those situations for sure. Those individuals really, frankly, should be quarantined and frankly, are being irresponsible if they do not quarantine during the duration. And their clinicians, their physicians will give them the proper guidance around the timing for those kinds of things. So let me give you a little more data on restaurants. This is actually an interesting CDC study. It was a questionnaire type of study where they took people they knew had COVID and other people that didn't have COVID, and they basically did a questionnaire to say, okay, what were they doing in the couple of weeks before they became infected? Now, this does not say that the infection happened because of these activities. Very much so, it could be a marker, right? If I'm somebody who's a little less cautious, perhaps I'm somebody who's eaten at a bunch of restaurants. It doesn't mean I got this at a restaurant. It may be that eating at a restaurant is a marker for somebody who's being less cautious in their lives. But basically, they saw a relative risk for people who had eaten in a restaurant in the 2 weeks prior to this of about 2 on average. Pretty broad confidence intervals on that, but the confidence intervals are for like 1.5 up to 3.8. So 1 would be equivalent risk basically. So we know there's an impact there, whether it's directly restaurants, whether it's otherwise, we don't know. Similar for bars. Saw this similar for religious institutions, although those error bands straddle the 1, so it's quite possible that that is erroneous. It could also be an indicator of people who just are out and about more, but there is data to suggest caution in terms of the things that we do. So we get asked this question before, and I don't think we've addressed it fully, so I wanted to just hit it very, very quickly, which is, okay, I'm outside on the street, I'm walking my dog, and I pass by other people when I'm exercising or when I'm walking. Is that okay without a mask? And I'd come back to what Dirk said, which is outside far, far safer than inside, but nowhere is fully safe when you're interacting with other people. I personally walk my dogs all the time. I go jog. I don't wear a mask during those times, but I give a wide berth when I see other individuals on the street. Again, you have to think about your own personal risks in all of this. And remember, it's a matter of duration and it's a matter of intensity of the contact that you have with people. And intensity is either the amount of time or the infectiousness of that person. So obviously wearing masks will decrease potential intensity because, as Dirk said, even if you're getting virus, you're probably getting a lower viral load. And of course, duration and how cooped up you are with somebody are all factors. So outdoors, by and large, safe for the most people. I don't believe you need to wear a mask when you're going around, but if you are immunocompromised or severe risk, yes, I would be wearing a mask whenever I'm anywhere where I'm going to come close to any other individuals. Halloween's coming up. This is a tough one. I can think of several Halloweens we all but canceled because it rained and the kids, were disappointed and moved on and didn't really get their normal Halloweens. But you're all going to make, your individual sort of risk-benefit analysis around this. This is the advice coming from the CDC around Halloween, which is if you are going to trick or treat, some pretty common sense type metrics. I will tell you, Julie and I have decided, we're usually handing out tons of candy. We're not going to do it this year. And we don't think it's the right thing to do during a pandemic. I don't have small kids anymore, of course, but I'd be figuring out another fun activity for them to do as an alternative. I'd find a way to make Halloween extra fun. It'll be a really memorable Halloween, for them, hopefully in good ways if you do that. So questions, and Dirk touched briefly at the end about coming in for the care that you need. Is an endoscopy safe? I don't want to take my mask off. How do I know it isn't in the air in the procedure room? So let me tell you, we have cared for literally tens of thousands of patients without COVID throughout every phase of this pandemic, including during the peaks of the pandemic in June and July here, and have done so incredibly safely. Patients are basically separated so that you will not come into contact knowingly, at least, with a patient with COVID. Even in the emergency room, anybody who has COVID or has any potential of COVID are getting shunted into different areas and cared for in different areas. We are, very, very good about masking, about social distancing, about protecting. Keep in mind, we have employees coming to work day in, day out, seeing patients with COVID, and knock wood, they're not going home getting COVID from working here. And so we are certain we can keep you safe. I will tell you, I've done this before, and I showed you a letter previously around mammography. Get these preventive screening kinds of things. The last thing we want to do is find out 6 months from now we missed a small colon cancer that got 6 months bigger and is harder to treat, or a breast cancer, or whatever else it is. Come in, get your care. We will keep you as safe as possible. I promise you it's going to be a lot safer than if you're going eating out at a restaurant or many of those other activities that people are doing. This is a little bit of data actually that came out of the Journal of the American Medical Association, yet another confirmatory piece of high concern and alarm for what happened in the spring. This is the number of diagnoses of different cancers that happened in each of these time periods, kind of through the peak of the pandemic. At the left of each of these, you see the baseline number of cancers that would normally be diagnosed. And you see, in some cases, half as many cancers were being diagnosed during those times. Clearly, people don't have half as much cancer. This is an issue of delays in diagnosis. And of course, we know with every single cancer that exists, time matters, and it matters to get that early. So again, we need to get people in. And then finally, I'll wrap up with, how are we doing? We've gotten asked, how's Houston Methodist doing? Well, I'm pleased to say that, a lot of great work's happened. We set some goals that we thought were pretty aggressive back in May to get back to normal. And I will always give us yellow on safety because we're driving always forward to be safer and safer. This is always the first goal, pandemic or not. So we can never achieve a green in my mind on this because we can always be that next level safe. But we've done this very, very safely. We got our volumes back to normal by July 1st. They tailed off a little at the peak of the pandemic and have been coming back, and I'll talk about that. We've actually managed to break even every month but March, April, and May, which is pretty phenomenal. Those 3 months were pretty brutal. In fact, we've managed to hit budget for the rest of that year, and I'm very proud of our team for doing that. We maintained a full operations during that second surge, and we have not furloughed, laid off, pay cut a single individual for COVID. We're the only system I'm aware of in town, and among a small number nationally who have been able to do that. So about 6 weeks ago, I set new goals for the rest of the year, again being the safest hospital system. We tailed off a little on volumes as we had so much COVID in place, so getting those back to normal by October 1st, and by and large, we're there. The ER is a little different dynamic than it was before, maybe a couple of years, but on aggregate we are. Not to set overly aggressive targets. I wanted to hit them recognizing we have a lot of inefficiencies, either operationally because of COVID or PPE and costs, that we would hit at least 75% of budget. I'm happy to say September we already hit budget, which is really great. We will continue to maintain full operations kind of no matter what happens. And we're going to push what makes Houston Methodist special. So first of those is our focus on unparalleled safety, quality service, and innovation. Again, we hit U.S. News and World Report honor roll this summer. Very happy with that. Third time in 5 years. The first back-to-back we've been on the honor roll, and the fourth time in our history. Really working to get us firmly ensconced there. The last 5 years, we've never been less than number 25, and so I'm really proud of where we are. And then Vizient, which is University Health System Consortium, rates hospitals and ranks hospitals on a whole bunch of attributes that don't involve reputation, which that other data does from U.S. News. We had 5 hospitals hit the top group of their respective cohorts, which is the only hospital system other than the Mayo Clinic, which also had 5 hospitals in the entire United States. Last year we had 4, and we were the only one with 4, and Mayo Clinic had 3. So proud of our hospitals. Highest score ever at the main hospital. Second year in a row, we're number 2 in the country in Sugar Land. And look at the 2 most important lines, mortality and safety. We had 2 hospitals in 2 different surveys be the number 1 hospital in mortality, 2 hospitals in 2 different surveys be the number 1 hospital in safety, and then a hospital that was number 2 in safety, only beat out by one of our other hospitals. And so really, really great results. We continue to drive on these fundamentals. And then really those other things of strategic advantage, our people. Our people are just amazing. They've been amazing every step of the way. And I mean in terms of care very broadly. But one of those is what I talked about in terms of pay, stability, and other things like that. We have cared for our people. You have helped us care for our people. So thank you so much. You've also seen we are not slowing down when it comes to our academic programs. We are full speed ahead, continuing to do recruitment, develop programs like you heard from Dr. Britz and Dr. Appel's program that we talked about with the cellular therapeutics program. We're recruiting new chairs. We'll announce one pretty soon. Really moving dramatically. Our marketing and PR have been, kind of phenomenal during this. We've gotten lots of national attention, which has been a good thing for our institution. We continue to drive the needs for expansions and recapitalizations. In fact, just reviewed a lot of those plans just Monday, and continue our investments in innovation, which have been so effective. So with that, I want to thank each of you again for being here. Now we've got a nice little video here, not just a little video, a nice video here. It is baseball season, and as painful, unfortunately, as the outcome has been the last 3 nights, we love our Astros, and we had a little treat from a former Astro here. So please join me for this video.
Hello, Houston Methodist frontline workers. Andy Pettit here. Just wanted to send a little quick message to you guys. Thank y'all so much for the sacrifice that you've made over the last 5 to 6 months. It does not go unnoticed. The countless hours we all know that y'all have spent away from your family, your friends, your loved ones, to take care of us, to take care of people like me and people around this community. The selflessness that y'all have shown is absolutely amazing, and it does not go unnoticed. Just wanted to send this message to let y'all know that. I pray and have been praying for you guys, for the essential workers, the frontline workers through this, and me and my family will continue to pray for you guys. I want you to know that. Fortunately enough, no one in my family has come down with this virus. I hope and pray that most of you have stayed healthy. Your families have stayed healthy. We will continue to lift that up in prayer. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to just send this message to you guys and encourage y'all to know that people are so thankful and are praying for you guys. And the work y'all are doing does not go unnoticed. So again, thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart. God bless you guys, all right?
Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. As I've said before, the support that has, an outpouring of support that's come to our workers, to our frontline individuals, to everybody really who's been here to keep caring for the citizens of Houston has been so meaningful to all of us. We certainly appreciate our partnership with the Houston Astros so deeply. We wish them the best of luck. We got to go win 4 games in a row here. Maybe we might need to get him out there drafted on the team here. We could use it. But I'm forever an optimist. So let's hope that they have a better outcome tonight. So, well, I'm going to hit some of the questions now that came in ahead of time, but we've also had some very good questions coming in through the chat here as well. But let me hit a couple of the ones that came in earlier first. So we've kind of touched on this, Dirk, but this prophylactic drug for COVID, you think this is a real possibility at this point?
Sure, absolutely. And well, first off, I have to confess that my family thinks I have a tendency to be pedantic. And at the risk of being pedantic, I just want to remind everybody that we do have prophylactics for COVID-19. They're called masks, soap and water, eye protection, physical distancing, all that stuff. That is about as effective as a drug, really. In terms of drugs, yeah, I think we're never going to have something that you're going to take every day for the whole, year round to protect you from COVID-19. That would just be silly. But if you have documented exposures, if your test turns positive, things like that, the monoclonal antibodies are certainly going to be something that is able to be used prophylactically. If you had to go into a high-risk situation for your job, for example, something like that. I didn't talk about it today, but we've also got a number of drugs that are available in a pill form that clinical trials are going on. Some of them are looking a little bit promising, and those may also serve as prophylactic. So yeah, this is a real possibility.
Well, great. Well, thank you. Well, so I got a question because I remember last time I talked about packing my son off to college when we were talking about schools, and we put him in his N95 mask and a set of goggles, and I was asked, well, where do I get those? Which goggles? And we didn't get the brand. Dirk showed up there, but it was basically the same thing. I think they were $7 on Amazon. So I went back and looked through our search history to even find it. Frankly, this is about preventing things from accessing the mucous membranes of the eye. So a face shield works because it's, anything that's kind of flying at you works. Kind of enclosed goggles probably work even better for your eyes. But the face shield may also prevent some of that from hitting your mask, which of course you're touching. The other thing, talking to our infection prevention experts, is when you wear goggles or you wear that face shield, you mess with your eyes less because you can self-inoculate as well. So very simple, nothing special. You can go out and get yourself a set of goggles. And I guess a related question then, Dirk, people asking voting. Obviously, we're started that yesterday. Had record voting across Harris County and surrounding counties in person, with the first day of in person. So if people are going to in-person vote, would you recommend they wear a face shield in addition to a mask?
I think it's a good idea. You really don't know how close you're going to get to people. You're going to be in contact with air that a lot of people have been in. I think it's a good idea.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to switch then to one of the questions that came in today, and that was Dr. Appel, and it asks, you talked about some of these deleterious effects. Are there any studies that parse that down to age groups?
There really are not, because we don't know the total incidence, as I mentioned. But we know that neurologic diseases are far more common in the aged. We know that the major risk factor for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS is age. We know that the vascular system can be compromised, the immune system. So I suspect the answer is going to be that when you're a little bit older, you're a little bit more susceptible to any of the diseases, even without COVID-19. If you add COVID-19 to this, the coronavirus, then you're going to dramatically increase susceptibility. And it's all the more reason for us to be practicing the kind of safety that you and Dirk have been talking about.
So brain fog, it's one of those names too that scares you just listening to the name, right? But asking, is it temporary? Could it be permanent? Somebody stating they've heard horrible things about this. What do we know, and what do we know about the duration of something like the sort of clouded thinking brain fogginess that people are reporting so pretty significantly?
The real problem is brain fog is a wonderful term, and it has no scientific counterpart. So we don't know whether brain fog means dementia, alterations, doesn't mean a psychiatric illness, does in fact mean that the vessels are inflamed. So we can have the vessels inflamed, we can have direct virus. My major concern is let's avoid the acute problems, because it's the acute problems that lead to the chronic problems that gave rise to, and that's why we talked about the flu epidemic of 1916-18 left a population of serious neurologic diseases some 5 to 10, 20 years later. We need to practice protection now.
Well, and we know that with SARS-1, that many years later we saw vascular outcomes problems in people who may not have had that dramatic of a problem with those issues the first go around.
And that's why I pointed to alterations in the immune system as it tries to attack the viruses, in fact, can attack the body, and that's the chronic consequence of the acute infection or the acute viral alterations in blood vessels, etc. So we need to do everything we can to protect ourselves up front, and that's what Dirk was talking about.
So one of the questions that had come in beforehand, Dirk, was really talked about some of the cardiac sequelae, but I think this could be broadly applied to really all of these. And the question was, what percentage of people are getting these, and what percentage of people perhaps, is there a difference whether you're hospitalized or whether, you're milder at home, and what do we still not know?
Well, we don't know a whole lot, but some of the fragmentary data indicates that these long-term sequelae could be quite common. For example, there was a study, they did MRIs of the heart on people who had COVID, and it's like 70% of them had abnormalities in their heart. And it included people who had relatively mild symptoms. You would logically expect that the more severe illness would be associated with a higher prevalence of more severe long-term complications, but we really don't have good data on that.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges, but I will say, you know, I think every physician, I know Dr. Drews, who's been answering questions, would clearly say this, but every one of us coming through our training, we learn during the course of being a physician to respect infectious disease. I mean, infectious diseases are one of those things that when they get out of hand, they can really have devastating consequences. And if you look through human history, they've been the leading cause of death probably through all the way through until pretty recently when we started obviously getting an impact on that. And it was actually the public sanitation and other things that made a biggest impact. But then, of course, vaccines and antibiotics and other things have helped as well. But all of us respect this. And I'll echo what I said about my son. I don't want my son getting this because I know he's going to be fine at 21, or my 25-year-old daughter who's working as a medical student now, or my 14-year-old who's back at high school. I don't want them getting this because I don't understand what this means for their health 10 years from now. I'm not really worried about any of them if they got it tomorrow. It'd be like, yeah, you got a case of the flu. That's probably accurate in that age group for the vast, vast majority. But we don't understand the long-term sequelae, even in young people. And when you hear and see all these reports, it's very concerning. So the best approach is don't get it at all. Let's keep it keep it to as few people as we possibly can together societally. So I'll pick up a question that came in today, which was I guess there may be a political tinge to this, and I try and avoid politics, so I'm going to do my best. But the question was, should Houston remain at a red level right now regarding COVID? And I will tell you, this has been a subject of dramatic amounts of discussion. One of the reasons that we across the TMC created a dashboard and created dials, because it's really hard to just say, these very categorically specific issues. And the challenge and where we've pushed a lot is that when things came down by 80 to 90% in the hospitals, meaning we were doing so much better, we did not bring our threat level down even slightly. So now when we see things going back up, the toolkit of saying, hey, we've got a problem, now let's go back to red. Let's say if we'd gone to an orange or a pink or whatever the other color would be, we lose that toolkit. So unfortunately, from a county level, the ability to actually say, uh-oh, we got a problem, let's elevate our risk level is not going to be there. So I think some of those things could be done differently. Personally, I think it's very hard to put them in distinct categories. But I can tell you definitively across TMC data, across Houston Methodist data, there's no question we've turned a corner back in the wrong direction. Whether that gets out of hand, et cetera. I talked about some of our guesstimates, but it is a significant issue as we talk about that. So, Dirk, can you talk a little bit about length of immunity? We had a question here about how long are we seeing with immunity, and do we think the vaccines will inoculate all strains of the virus that are out there right now?
Sure. For a second question first, the current vaccines are targeting parts of the virus that are present in all strains. So yeah, the vaccines will cover everything. In terms of the duration of immunity, this thing has only been with us for like 6 months. So we don't really know. The best data out there suggests that antibodies are maintained in people who've been ill enough to be hospitalized for at least 4 months. And really, they're not going down. So my guess is that when you have had COVID-19, if you've been sick enough to be in the hospital, you're probably protected for a significant length of time. As well, we've seen data on cellular immunity from infections that have occurred in the past, cross-reacting with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So I suspect that fairly robust, fairly long-term immunity to COVID-19 is going to be what we end up seeing, but we really don't have the data yet. But I'd say you're safe for probably at least a few months, and with a good vaccine, probably for a couple of years.
Obviously, that's hopefully very good news. But I think we all can very much envision a scenario where, COVID vaccines are a fact of life for us for some significant period of time, whether it's boosters, whether it's changes in strains, whether it's a better vaccine coming out a year from now than came out now. All of those scenarios
totally
are plausible, and I'll be surprised, honestly, if I'm not getting more than one over the course of the next few years, as will most of us. So I got a question about how best to protect families if we have friends and family visiting over the holidays. Obviously, we're a little more than a month and 6 weeks, something like that, away from Thanksgiving, and then of course subsequent holidays. Of course, one of our concerns with COVID has been social isolation and people not being together, and many of the negative impacts of that. There's not an easy answer for a question like this. It depends on risk modulation. Those are gatherings oftentimes where people fly in together from all around the country, or where you bring, multiple units of a family together. You really need to think about the scenarios. I got asked the question about testing beforehand, so let me go through a couple of things. Let me tell you what we've done in our family. Now, both sets of grandparents, or my parents and Julie's parents, are local, and we've had a couple kids' birthdays and other things happen along the way. We had an 80th birthday for one grandparent where we did a drive-by, birthday party, and all the friends kind of drove up and waved, and it was actually a lot of fun. It'll be very memorable. But for some of those other birthdays, we'll get together, but we do so either outside, very distant from the different groups. I'm serving the food, or my kids are serving food, but we're doing it with some gloves and masks, and one person's kind of serving what goes there if we do takeout or something like that. So there are ways to do that safely. They are not risk-free. None of these are risk-free. They are a degree of risk that we chose to accept in those kinds of cases. So we don't have people flying in from all over the country. We'd be local, so we'll probably do something similar to that for the holidays. If you want to bring people in from around, obviously that's a risk judgment call, and you need to think about who's at risk most. You may want to virtually bring in somebody who's at highest risk in your family as opposed to some of the lower risk. You may want to test. If you are going to test, kind of the closest to when you're going to all be together, the better, but logistically, realistically, probably about 48 hours before you get together. If you test, you will be a lot safer. Will you be fully safe? No. Of course, you could still get the virus in that next 2 days. You can have a false negative, but there are things you can do. We can help you arrange that kind of testing. And I've known a lot of families that have done some gatherings and some things like that where they've done that. But the key mistake I see in those situations is that everybody then sees that as sort of a free pass and, we're all 100% safe. And the reality is that's still not the case from the travel that's occurred, from the time that's elapsed, from the fact that no test is 100% sensitive. So you still need to use a lot of common sense and caution and all the protections that we talked about. Dr. Appel, I want to come to a question that came about the neurological system and asking, is the impact looking to be different on those who have underlying neurological nervous system diseases than those who perhaps don't? Do you see any difference among those individuals?
So I saw that question and I said to myself, does 1 + 1 = 1? Or does 1 + 1 = 4 or 5? And that's the concern here. So if you have a neurologic condition, then what is absolutely clear is that your immune system is altered, your vascular system is altered, and you are far more susceptible to any further insult, not just adding to the previous insult, but synergizing with that previous insult. And as a result, I'm very concerned about 1 + 1 = 5. So the major issue is what we've been stressing. Mass avoidance of the virus, what have you, especially if you're in the older age group where you're far more susceptible, you've got to be even more careful. I like the idea that you had that drive-by party and you decrease the susceptibility. So you were avoiding the 1 + 1 = 5, and that's what we need to all strive for.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Appel. So Dr. Sostman had a question here about, do you find any sources for most reliable news about COVID-19? Where do you go and learn about it. As this person states, there's been too much media hype, which I would totally agree with. And then I don't know if a corollary, but a follow-on question from that same individual: is there any truth to this whole Neanderthal gene story that we've been seeing out in the press?
Okay, well, as far as news, obviously Science and Nature and Lancet and the New England Journal are the places that you and I and Dr. Appel and Dr. Britz go to really try to drill down into research results. In terms of keeping abreast with the news, the sites that I find the most useful and the least political are the business news sites, because they're all about making money. And they don't care about your political views, but either Reuters or Bloomberg, they have really good daily updates on developments from around the world on the virus, and it's pretty much fact-based. So if it were me, those would be the places I would recommend to keep up to date. The Neanderthal question, I love that question. Whoever you are, if you're listening, you obviously know what you're talking about and you're up to date. So here's the deal, and I'll get a little nerdy here because it's just so fun. But as you know, we're probably responsible for exterminating the Neanderthals in one way or another. So that's modern humans probably contributed to that. And so the story here is the revenge of the Neanderthals. There's been one very high quality, but only one paper identifying a cluster of genes on chromosome 3 with a higher risk of severe COVID-19. It turns out that cluster of genes is very clearly passed on to us by the Neanderthals. As everybody on the call I'm sure knows, a couple % of everybody's genome is derived from either the Neanderthals or the Denisovans. So it looks like that COVID risk cluster of genes is indeed from the Neanderthals, but it's only one study. Remember, we had one study about ABO blood groups, and if you were type A, man, you were doomed. And then the most recent study is, well, maybe that's not so true. So this may or may not turn out to be the case. And again, remember, genes are not destiny. Even if you have a higher risk of severe disease as a result of this, you can prevent it by all the things we've been talking about.
So it's safe to say that probably from a couple of those studies, there probably are some genetic susceptibilities, and from common sense of us looking at some family clusters and other things where we have particular severity, genetic susceptibility or risk is
sure, absolutely. I mean, for any disease, there's some degree of genetic susceptibility, which for some things may be a few percent, and for others may be almost all of the risk. It's unclear in COVID how much genes play a role, but probably a fair amount in terms of...
For ALS, I'm asked that every day. Are my genes responsible? And I said, we're in Texas. What is clear, the genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. Mm-hmm. Let's not let the environment here, COVID-19, pull the trigger.
Yeah. Right. Well, of course, we can't, none of us really know our genetic susceptibility, nor can we do anything about that. We can do something about pulling the trigger, as you said. So I'm going to wrap up very quickly with two quick questions. One has to do with schools, and really just asking a couple different questions about, do we have any data yet to say whether schools are resulting in big outbreaks? And the short answer is no. We are obviously seeing some clusters, as we would expect, among some schools. But as I've talked about before, there's a balancing act we have to make societally. I would say, given current data, it makes sense that schools are largely back in session. Obviously, we're on the cusp for HISD. But we're going to have to see where things go over the next few weeks. If we allow things to get like they did in July, we're going to have to revisit those questions. So again, extra caution. What we see, and somebody was asking about the comparison with restaurants, for the most part, the schools that are doing this right, the kids are masked, and they're masked essentially all day, but for when they're eating. And the really good ones that I've seen, they have kids outside, socially distanced, and they're eating outdoors. and that is a safer setting, certainly safer setting than a packed restaurant or bar or something like that. The final question is, somebody asked me about, okay, so many patients with COVID get pneumonia, and so would pneumonia shots prevent getting ill from pneumonia? So let me parse that question out a little bit. Many of the people who get pneumonia from COVID, they're getting COVID pneumonia. So the COVID is infecting their lungs and giving them pneumonia. And we don't have a preventive shot. I mean, that would be ultimately, hopefully, a COVID vaccine. Some people are getting super infections of other infections, and that's the same thing with flu. When somebody then gets an additional infection of their lungs, that can be quite difficult, quite deadly. The main pneumonia shot we have is against pneumococcus, pneumococcal pneumonia. There's actually 2 shots now. There's a 13 and a 23, and as you get older, both of those are part of your regimen to get that. Yes, that will prevent superinfection with a pneumococcal pneumonia, which is actually a common cause of death in those who have flu as elderly patients. So again, be up to date on all your other vaccines, go get your flu shot, and then let's hope for a vaccine as soon as we can with this. So I want to wrap things up. I want to thank our Neurological Council. I want to thank, of course, our Society for Leading Medicine and the Kibitzes and many others for their tremendous support. And I want to thank each of you. And if you'd like to learn more about what you heard about today, by all means, contact us, email us. If you'd like to know more about Society for Leading Medicine, there'll be information about that communicated with you as well. And I'm hoping when we come back and talk sometime in November, when we should have a very interesting program, I'm telling you we're in a, at worst, a steady state that doesn't look much worse than it is today. But that's dependent on us all doing the right thing. God bless. Have a wonderful day and stay safe.